All right, so let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, Dave. My name is Claudia. I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Dave Kerzner accepted our invitation to our show. Dave, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Claudia.
Yeah, no problem. Let's go back to the beginning with your musical career. Were you born into a musical family? Or how old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lesson or guitar lesson in your case?
No, I wasn't born to a musical family at all. I'm the only one in my family. Well, let's say my immediate family is non-musical, but we had a piano, and everyone in my family took lessons, including myself, and then everybody quit, including myself, with this teacher because he was really kind of a stiff, and he wasn't very much fun. And then I would still bang around on the piano. I was the only one who still kept playing it because it was in the playroom where we would, play and stuff, the converted garage. And one day my mom said to me, "You seem to like playing it anyway. Would you be open to a younger, hipper, cooler teacher?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And so I had this teacher come in, this guy, Brad, that she somehow found. I don't know how she found him. And it was like an audition because I had been so traumatized by this other teacher trying to teach us classical, but not in a fun way, in a really just kind of like boring way. And because I like classical, but it just wasn't like cool classical. It was like Furry Elise over and over again. It was terrible. And so I said, well, I sat down with the guy. I said, "Would you be willing to just play in it one time? And then I watch what you're doing and ask you questions." Like, yeah, we could do that. And I said, "Would you be willing to listen to one of my records, figure out the part and teach it to me?" And he said, yeah, we could do that too. He said, "We can do all those things as long as you let me teach you theory along with it." So I would take something like Genesis 3 Sides Live in the Cage medley and go, "All right, figure this out." And show me. And he would. But he was great teacher, because he would say, "Okay, here's the In the Cage solo." And he would say, "Now what he's doing here is diminished scales. So now you're going to learn your diminished scales." But it was great because it gave it context. Like, now I care about diminished scales because it's going to sound, like Tony Banks. So, yeah, that was a great. So, but I was the only one in the family who played, still to this day.
Makes a big difference to having good teachers. 1, 2, that they care and they engage with you, right? And 3, having the motivation to do whatever you want in life. And that's important. Growing up, I see it in my life as well. What kind of music were you listening to when you were like high school? You were, I don't know, 14, 15, hanging out with other kids in high school. And
I liked Genesis, Rush, Kansas, Styx, Boston, Queen, Led Zeppelin. What else did I like back then? Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd a little later, actually. Pink Floyd scared me when I was younger. Really? And I remember being really young, as in like, how old would I have been? I don't know, like 10 or, let's see, 12, I guess, when The Wall came out. And I liked it. But I was just like, open the cover and you see this big giant ass, and you're like, what is all this? For a kid, it's kind of overwhelming. But they're one of my favorite bands, Pink Floyd, we were talking about. And I love Led Zeppelin. Yeah, all that stuff. Later on, got into the Beatles. But, and then I also liked bands like Triumph, April Wine. I liked that a lot when I was younger, the Canadian bands, in addition to Rush. And then Steely Dan, I have and then later on Tears for Fears. So I have diverse tastes to some extent. It's not only prog rock, which is what I do now mainly, but I like, certain, like Supertramp, love Supertramp as well. Yes, of course. Later on, King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. but that's rock. But like also the Police and other bands.
Man, I love all the bands that you mentioned. For me, I have a wide range of stuff. I mean, I don't know, my music collection is about I don't know, around 10,000. Everywhere in the house, I have one furniture there, but another one there, the closet there, and 3 floors. So my wife keep on complaining why I keep on buying music, but it's different. I don't know. I like the stuff, but I like electronic music a lot, from the Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, and the classic, all the classic band that you mentioned, jazz too, some Latin music. There's one guy told me a long time ago, well, there is good music and bad music, and I like good music. There's some stuff I don't listen too much because I don't understand. I remember when I came here to the United States to study, I didn't speak the language that well. So country music maybe was great, but didn't do anything to me because I didn't understand the lyrics. So I didn't appreciate it. So I was going more from the rhythm, the bass, the drummer, and so forth. Of course, I came across my first record back in '76 would have been Pandethini. Tangerine Dream, and then Jean-Luc Ponty, and then an album from Genesis back in '76. It had been, Trespass, probably one of those. I don't remember yet. And the rest is history. Then I grew up in a family where music was important. I was born in Chile, and I came to the United States to study. My dad had an obscene amount of music, so he told me that when they brought me back from the hospital, he put Louis Armstrong and Carlos Gardel from Buenos Aires, from Argentina. Of course, I didn't like the music, and then when I was 14, I kind of discovered rock and roll, and I was going crazy. Where I can see those bands, and of course, 36 years ago, nobody was going to Latin America. Now everybody goes to Latin America. Back in the day, nobody was. So I was going crazy. Internet didn't exist. YouTube didn't exist.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
I was buying used vinyl. I said, man, I want to see these guys one day. And eventually I did okay in my life. I came here and I got lucky on the way, I suppose. And I've been able to see all these great bands. So I'm in the border with Virginia, and no, I live in Virginia, but the border with Washington, D.C. and Maryland. So every band comes this way, Dave, as you know, you've been around here. So I'm very lucky because I'm able to see, 40 to 50 gigs a year.
Great. Wow.
I'm very, 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 very happy in my life. What were your earliest band? Was it difficult for you to break into the music industry? So eventually, right, you were 14, 15, you like music, and quite sure you have a conversation with your parents. Man, your parents maybe putting pressure, forget about music, man, go to school, go to university, you're not going to make any money, or they were supportive?
We're both Ivy League college graduates, so they were surprisingly cool about me pursuing music. But they were always been very supportive. They bought me my first synthesizer at Radio Shack.
Wow.
Radio Shack had a really cool synthesizer. I still have it. Not that exact one, but the same model. It's called, they did a collaboration with Moog. So it's a Radio Shack Moog synthesizer. And, you talked about, let's say, first bands and breaking in. I did at 13, 14 years old with kids that were older. Even when I was 15, I was in a band with a bunch of 25-year-olds. And the reason was because I was one of the only people who had a synthesizer. There was plenty of players, plenty of drummers, plenty of bass players, not as many, but like a synthesizer, a keyboard player, that was rare back then. So I'd get to play with all sorts of different people. And it was great because I kind of accelerated my whole taste for what I do now. Back then, just early education on also recording, because I bought a really nice 4-track, and because I had this little mixer and a 4-track, I started playing producer at 15, like what I do now. But I was like doing it with my high school friends, and they would look at me like, who made you the producer? Who made you boss? And I'm like, hey man, I'm the guy with the equipment. You want to do it or not? And I would just say things that were, I had an instinct for, like just basic stuff like, can you do that again? Or, can you do a different fill? You're doing the same fill every time. And they get a little bit mad with me. But now, they're accountants and they do other things, and they look at me and they're like, and they all love Genesis and all those bands. And I'm working with people like Steve Hackett from Genesis or from, with Genesis themselves, helping them with stuff. And they're looking at me like, we haven't had this actual conversation, but they must be like, well, I guess, he was serious, about his calling. And, it could have been theirs too, but they just, I don't know, like it takes a certain craziness, a certain sacrifice, because I could have a job behind a desk and make a lot more money. And I do have a job, but in the music software world, but I mean, I could, just do that and be more successful in terms of the business world or whatever. But, my philosophy is, we have this window of time. Nobody even knows how long it's going to be. If you're lucky, you get to live till you're 80, 90 plus years old. Some people, die before 50. There's a friend of a friend who just died at 47. It's like, okay, so you have this window of time. The most important thing is you're happy. You're doing what you love. And this is what I love, so I wouldn't love making tons of money, but being behind a desk and not doing what my passion is. So, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're Steve Jobs and you've got billions of dollars, he's gone. It's dead. Everyone, we all go. So it's like nobody's keeping score. No one cares if you have, it's nice to have those things, but really it's just, it's like, well, what is important to you? And that's how I see everything I do. And my parents understand that, they're proud of what I do. Of course, I have the most hilarious story with my mom. My dad was cooler about it. My mom was, when I was like around 19, 20, I went to college and then I moved to LA, and my credits didn't transfer. And I did like a little bit of college at UCLA and Grove School of Music, but it was never going to really end up with a degree. They were all miscellaneous classes that I wanted to take that weren't required for the degree. And I was like, I'd be here another whole 4 years. I'm like, I'm just going to work in the music industry. So my mom would bug me about it and say, when are you going to go back to college? And I would say, Mom, I'm working with Crowded House. And that sounded, we know what Crowded House is, a great band. It sounded ridiculous to her. I'm like, I'm working with Smashing Pumpkins. Like, why? What is a pumpkin? What are you doing? Get back to college. So I'm like, but I would just do what I did. And she was supportive, but still kind of always trying to push me to do it. And then I got to work with her all-time favorite music artist, just by pure chance, Barbra Streisand. Wow. And I hit it off with Barbra so well that after we did the New Year's Eve concert in 1993, so after the show, I told Barbra that my mom is a huge fan. And she didn't even know. That's how professional I was at 24 or whatever it was. And she's like, she is? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, oh. I said, would you sign this for her? It's like this little commemorative stamp thing from the merch table. She's like, absolutely. It's like, what's her name? I said, Sherry. She goes, to Sherry, your son's terrific. Love, Barbra. And I'm like, here you go. And never a word about college again. It was just kind of like, oh, all right, validation. He's in the music industry. And, my favorite artist says he's terrific. So, it was pretty funny. I mean, it shouldn't have to have been that, but it just so happens that it was, and a guy got her off my back.
Yeah, that's great. I have a kind of similar story. I was a terrible kid. I was chasing girls and drinking beer and doing stupid stuff when I was in Chile, and I wanted to come to see bands, and my parents didn't want to help me because they thought, well, if you're having very bad grades here and you don't speak the language, what makes you feel that you will succeed there? So I talked to my uncle and I ended up coming to the United States, and I went from a C.D. grade in a private school with the Jesuits, Catholic school. I have now a bunch of degrees, and I have done very well in my life. And I'm a computer scientist, but music, this is my passion, Dave. During the pandemic, I opened one radio. I sent the link to friends. I opened another one. Then I opened another one, and then I thought, well, I always wanted to talk to these musicians, and I thought, well, why don't open like a podcast? It's the pandemic. Bands are at home. They're not touring. They couldn't tour. They couldn't go anywhere. Everyone must be at home. So I started calling people, and nobody was getting back to me. And eventually, Steve Hackett was my first interview. So I would never forget that. And very grateful to him. I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, actually, and I'm very happy. And the rest is history. So and now I'm talking to you, and you are a great guy too. And you can like it on the way. I suppose it's hard work and dedication. And along the way, people need to give you breaks, I suppose. And but I wake up happy every day. I don't know how people get depressed or have so many problems. I don't know. I try to listen to a lot of music every day, at least 2 hours a day from the last 50 years, believe it or not, every day. So go to a concert and make me happy. I'm a very happy person,
I think music helps people be happy. It's one of the things I love about what I do. It's kind of funny because everybody has different reasons. And you said you like to talk about this kind of stuff, the psychology. And everybody has different reasons for wanting to be a musician. Some people want to be famous. They see somebody getting a lot of attention and people cheering, and they want to be the center of that attention. That's not me. What I do like, every time I've gone to a concert, every single time, I imagine myself being on stage, even since I was a kid. And not for the attention, for the energy, for the excitement, for the connection between you're creating sound, music, and everyone's feeling it together. And it's a gift. So I'm sort of like, and I feel that same way about like listening to recordings. So I have thousands of CDs as well. I don't have them all, displayed. Actually, I need a way to do it. You and Alejandro have your, but I get so much out of the music that I've purchased over the years. I listen to, and the reason I do what I do is I want to offer the world some of the same things that I got out of the music. So you talk about someone like Steve Hackett and Genesis. They're very rare styles of music that are, there's progressive rock and neo-progressive rock that draws upon them as an influence. And I'm certainly one of them. But even still, progressive rock as a genre is rare compared to the mainstream, which is all this other, styles of hip hop and pop and country and all these other things that most people listen to. And yet music like we're talking about here, Genesis, Pink Floyd, and Pat Metheny Group, or they offer something very unique and special in terms of the moods they put you in, the place they take you on a journey. It's kind of like a little bit like cinematic, like a film with your mind, because you can listen to it and just kind of drift off, but it's vibration. And so the thing is that there are certain things I feel that are just, let's say, good medicine, as opposed to medicine. And my dad's was a doctor, he's a retired doctor. And I've always been sort of like, I only take medicine if I have to. I'm not against it, but man-made chemical things, I'm just sort of like, yeah, all right, but I'm not going to rely on it. I'm not going to, that to me is not like, you know, what's going to make you happy, and not drugs either. I don't take drugs. I've worked in the music industry, so I work with a lot of people who take drugs. I'm not saying I've never taken drugs, but I'm not like someone who takes drugs or even drinks much. Actually, I drink a little, but in moderation. But to me, it's not good. It's not, got to be careful. Any of those things in excess can be really bad for you. But music in excess, apart from your hearing loss, isn't bad for you. It's just the good stuff. And, you know, sunshine and fresh air. And, you know, so when you talk about depression, which obviously there's so much more to it, and I don't even understand it fully myself, because I don't feel it that way. I feel like life is a gift, and that music is a gift, and the fresh air and the sunshine is a gift, and it's never gets old to me. It's always just like, I feel grateful to exist, for one, and to be alive and in good health, and then to just be like, okay, what can I absorb today? You know, even if I'm just driving, it's like, oh, just driving is okay, but driving, you put on music, all of a sudden driving is fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel that.
Going to the gym,
working out, or going for a walk, or whatever. You know, it's I don't know. I don't play any instrument, Dave. I don't know how to read music, but music has given me so much satisfaction. I don't know. That's the best way I can put it. And
yeah.
You know, in terms of, let's say, soundtrack, right? I have soundtrack 800, 900, 1,000. I don't even know how much I have. So there's many music, many movies that I have never seen or will never seen. I have seen the music, and I put my headphone and listen to Ennio Morricone in Italy. I have interviewed a lot of musicians that compose music for film industry, especially people that specialize in keyboard, electronic music, scary movies. I put my headphone, I drink a beer on a Friday, and the music take me places. I would, you know, I would never, maybe I would never see the movie, but I kind of imagine, you know, different scenarios in the movie with that keyboards or the music in the background, and then the, you know, somebody entering a house or whatever the music, the movie happened to be, and giving me a lot of satisfaction. I think music, you say something very good. Maybe the music is healing. You know, provide like a healing factor for people. I'm a believer that, yeah, there, you know, everybody goes through difficult times in life, and yeah, I'm aware of that. But you know, I'm a human being like you. But I think many things, I don't know how can I say in English, but many things happen for us, not to us. I don't know if I can explain that. Well, one day when we are in face to face, I will tell you exactly what I mean. But I have seen the other side. Let me put it to you that way. And music has given me a lot of satisfaction. I try to do the right thing in life every day and help people out as much as I can. And you know, God, if God exists, I don't know. Or this country as an immigrant have been very good to me, and I got lucky on the way. I was able to study, you know, careers that they were lucrative. I'm a computer scientist during the day, and I have done okay. And this country has been a wonderful place to me. I'm very, very proud to be a U.S. citizen and being able to have a good job and be able to buy music and see, I don't know, 50 gigs a year, and talking to people like you. I'm happy. I don't know. I'm the type of person. You know, I try to get the bad energies and the bad thought out of me, and I try to concentrate on what is important in life. When I do it live, try to help people out, and music is important. I don't know, that's the best way I can describe. All right, let's go back to the interview. More than interview, this is a conversation about two people like music, and not real interviews. I'm not a journalist and nothing like that. In 1994, you contributed to Kevin Gilbert's solo album, and feel free to elaborate. As I say, all my questions are open-ended, so you know, you were young at the time, and eventually, when you were in California, you start meeting all these heroes of yours, right? And one after another, and as if somebody out there were moving the fingers and putting you into the right direction. And, but feel free to elaborate on that, Gilbert.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, LA, New York, London, there's certain places in the world that are hotspots for music and entertainment. LA, definitely entertainment industry. I remember bumping into a lot of just, famous actors. Like George Clooney was buying a pack of gum next to me while I was at the drugstore. And I'm like, oh, I didn't know you chewed Dentine or whatever it was. He was a nice guy. And like Clint Eastwood. I mean, I met all sorts of like celebrities, just being there. But with Kevin, Gilbert, I really liked Toy Matinee. A friend of mine, Mark, got me into them. And then one day Kevin just called me out of the blue because he had heard that I had Mellotrons, and that I've always had, since then, a keyboard collection. I was into vintage keyboards before they were even called vintage keyboards. There was this period of time in the early 90s where nobody wanted that stuff. They wanted like the new things, the rack mount MIDI keyboards, and like the older ones were like, oh, let's just throw this away or just sell it cheap. And so I knew their value, of course, because I read Keyboard Magazine with Tony Banks and Keith Emerson and Jan Hammer, and I was like dreaming of these keyboards, which were really expensive when I was in my teens. And there was no way I was getting a Prophet 5 when I was, a teenager, a Prophet 10. Flash forward, by the way, so, because I one of the reasons why I became a keyboard player was because of people like Tony Banks and Jeff Downs. And when you watched their videos, you saw they were surrounded by keyboards. And I was fascinated by like, well, what does that one do? What does that one do? What does that one do? And I'd read all about it. I know all about them. And maybe I'd get to play them at a music store until they kicked me out of the store. But flash forward to now, I own Tony Banks' actual keyboards, his actual Prophet 10, his actual ARP Quadra, and all that stuff, because I had a chance to work with them. And when they sold their studio last year, they contacted me. They contacted the Musical Box and but they contacted me first, probably because I was at the studio and I specifically said, I'm like, because they had sold the older Mellotron. And I'm like, you sold it? I was talking to Tony Banks' tech, Jeff Collingham, really great guy. And he's like, yeah, we sold it. I'm like, all right, listen, if you sell anything, you got to contact me. You got to let me know. And they did. And so I bought, all sorts of stuff. I got Mike Rutherford's Shergold 12-string guitar. And, I picked some of these vintage relics that we've seen, on Seconds Out or, on Abacab, Three Sides Live. I love this part of the video, actually, of the DVD, the VHS, whatever it was, of Three Sides Live, where Jeff Collingham, Tony's tech, is opening up the Prophet 5 and doing a little test. And I'm like, wow, and so it's cool that I'm friends with him because he's a great guy and he's a great, amazing tech. And now I have that. So because I've been into technical side and keyboards and sampling sounds, which is recording the sound of the instruments. I have a company called Sonic Reality that I started in the mid 90s. And because of all that, I've met a lot of musicians who are interested in that side of things, whether it's samples or the actual keyboard. So Kevin Gilbert called me out of the blue and said, I heard you have Mellotrons. Can I come to your studio and check it out? I said, yeah, sure. And I knew who he was. I was a fan already, of his work. And when he came in and he saw all the stuff and he saw that I had all of the keyboards that Tony used. I didn't have Tony Banks' actual keyboards then, but I had like the RMI and the ARPs and stuff of my own. And he's like, we should get a bunch of guys together and play the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And I'm like, sure, anytime, And so then he asked me to join his band, Thud. And that was 93 or like late 93, early 94. And then eventually there was a festival called Prog Fest in 1994. And he said to me, he goes, Kevin says, you still want to play the Lamb? And I'm like, sure. He's like, well, I know the perfect drummer, this guy, Nick DiVirgilio, who no one knew him yet. You know, it was before he was in Spock's Beard and played with Genesis and Tears for Fears and all that stuff, way before all that. And my old bandmate Stan Cody from Giraffe and this guy Dan Hancock would be great for the Steve Hackett part. Only problem is we have 1 week to learn it. And I'm like, let's do it. So we rolled up our sleeves, learned about an hour of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, played it once. We actually only rehearsed it one time through the whole thing. We learned a song each day, and then we just played it once, and then we played a lot. But it came out great. And people still talk about that show today because it was just really passionate. And of course, sadly, Kevin Gilbert is no longer with us. But that was, you know, something special to him. And then he also introduced me to Keith Emerson. And that's a whole other story, but it's a great story. And I became friends with Keith and helped Keith over the years and have worked with Keith. Another one of my heroes. I love all the keyboard players. I mean, I love the prog bands, but the keyboard players are my heroes. And I've, you know, made friends with guys like Eddie Jobson, Jeff Downs, Tony Banks, Keith, of course. And it's really great because they're all really nice people. Rick Wakeman, you know, they're like my kind of people. I don't know, like they're not as difficult, crazy, ego, whatever, as let's say maybe a singer might be or a guitar player. Keyboard players are a little more humble and a little more just sort of maybe a little more nerdy, but a little more approachable. Now, an exception to that is Steve Hackett. Steve Hackett is maybe the nicest guy in the music industry.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so, and he's very humble and he's a legend, and he doesn't, you know, have any, you know, he's great. And I'm actually, let's say, better friends with Steve than I am with Tony. Like Steve, I could go out to dinner with. Tony, you know, I don't know. Like we've never been out to dinner. But either way, it's just great to meet your heroes and not be disappointed, because, you know, I have met some people who I look up to and they weren't very nice, and it kind of spoiled it for me. I was like, oh, I wish I'd never met that person because I really like their work, but as a person, they're really an asshole. So, but that's just how it goes. And I've been very fortunate, though, to work with a lot of really cool, nice people who are fun to be around, and you know, you learn things from, and you know, it's not just about the whether they're famous or not. That's fun if they're famous, or if it's somebody, you know, you grew up listening to. That is fun. But what's more, but to me, it's not a superficial thing that I'm after, like trying to just, you know, tick off the box of every, you know, name dropping, you know, it's actually not that. It's more just going with the flow. And if something is sort of within range, you know, of like, hey, I have this idea, what about this? Like, for instance, later on with Sonic Reality, I worked with, I did a very, very rare session, studio experience, extremely rare. I'm the only person in the world who's done this. Worked with Alan Parsons and Nick Mason in the studio. Only person who's done that since the 70s, since Dark Side of the Moon. They haven't worked together. So, but I brought the two of them together, and it's not because I've got like tons of money or something and I can make it happen, or I'm somebody important or anything like that. It's because one thing leads to another. And if you have luck, synchronicity, everything, it can happen. So what happened with that was I was doing a sample session with Guy Pratt, bass player with Pink Floyd. And I was saying to him, we were talking about, you know, I don't know if his idea or my idea of saying, it would be great to do a sample library with Nick Mason. because he's underrated. He's really like, he's a great drummer because he's the best drummer for Pink Floyd. He may not be the best drummer for Genesis or something like that. I'm sure he isn't, and he knows it. But it doesn't get any better than Nick Mason for Pink Floyd music, and that music is classic. And his style is cool, just like Ringo. Like it's more like it's not about fancy playing and about chops. It's about feel and style and recognizable character. That's what he has. So, and I love the sound. So I was thrilled to be able to do it. And you know what the funny thing is? Most hilarious thing ever. I get a call from his manager, and you're not going to believe who his manager is. I didn't even know either. Tony Smith, who manages Genesis.
Wow, the man.
Yeah. And so at first, I had met Tony before and everything, but like he didn't know who he was talking to. And he was going to kind of like say no to the sample. I'd be like, why would we do this? How much money is involved? What is this? Like, and I said, Tony, this is Dave. I played in a band with Phil's son, and I helped Mike and Tony with the keyboards with my company, IK Multimedia and Sonic Reality. Okay. Yeah, you can do it. No problem. Go ahead, do your little thing. You know what I mean? But at first it was just like, why are we doing this? You know, I was like, I had to just kind of be like, well, for fun. You know, he was cool about it in the end. It wasn't like the biggest business thing. But anyway, I booked a session in England, and just out of curiosity, because I had worked with Alan Parsons before, I knew him. I contacted him. I said, I'm sampling Nick Mason. Would you want to be the engineer? And I told him the time, and it just so happens, because he lives on the West Coast, you know, in Santa Barbara, California. And I told him when we were doing it. He said, I'm going to be on vacation in London during that time. And he had to ask his wife, Lisa, if he could leave the vacation, you know, to work. I'm sure she was thrilled. But anyway, you know, he was already there. So it wasn't like I was flying people from all over to do this whole big thing. It was just like, oh yeah, like luck. So we did this session. We didn't do it at Abbey Road, but we did it at another studio called State of the Art, which I don't think is around anymore, but they had the EMI console. They actually had more Abbey Road gear than Abbey Road from the Dark Side. In fact, I think they even had the Dark Side sidecar, this amazing console I wish I had. But we did the session together, and I produced it. And so there was this one moment, and you know, everything was totally cool. Nothing was awkward. Nobody was acting like they're better than anybody else. It was all just like musicians in a room. It was great. No matter how old you are, how young you are, how, you know, whether you've sold, you know, the best-selling album of all time, or you've, you know, none of that matter. We're just in the studio. And I remember this one moment where Nick says, "Is that okay, Dave?" And then Alan turns to me and goes, "Is that okay, Dave? What do you think?" And I'm like, that's when it dawned on me. I'm like, is this real? Is this real? Like
a dream, man. They would wake up one day. Wow, good for you, man.
And it was great. And it just, but you know, it's not like it had to happen, those kind of things, or that it makes it any more success or important. It really, I don't see it that way. I just see it as something magical almost that happened, synchronicity, and I was able to do it. And then the cool thing about it too is that, you know, we recorded those sounds, and then those sounds musicians can buy to use their music. So that's what it's for. That's what that was for. But I'm also using it for my own. I used it on one of my albums, Static, the title track. That's Nick Mason on drums. And then I also, I'm producing a Pink Floyd tribute album that has basically Nick Mason on drums. In fact, it's one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to send a track over to Scott Page, who was the sax player from Momentary Lapse. And he's going to play thing. And I did a track with David Longdon, a Big Train, who's sadly also no longer with us. And I might release that soon, since they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon, and I did Us and Them with David. So you know, but again, to me, it's like the most important thing is the music and the sounds and what you're doing. And to me, like if I have a chance to work with the guy, like I remember when I was a kid, I used to put ads in the paper looking for guitar player influences, David Gilmour, Steve Hackett, and Steve Howe. And you hope that you met somebody who really understood all three and could actually, like, you know, give you that, you know, quality. And back then, no. But these days, yes, a lot of the guitar players I work with are fully aware that those are their influences too. But if I have a chance to work with the actual Steve Hackett, I haven't worked with Steve Howe or David Gilmour. I'd love to. It's not so much that they're famous, because there's other famous people that it's just like, well, I'm not trying to just collect famous names here. I just love what they do, and it's compatible with this song or that song. Like there's some songs I'll play and I go, oh man, if David Gilmour did a guitar solo on this, that would just be amazing. But more just, you know, for the music, not so that I could say I worked with David Gilmour. You know what I mean? Like it's I'm gonna create something with it, not just have the gimmick of the novelty of it. You know, on my, you know, my board of, you know, it's like that's not so important. It's more about like what we did, and what we did with Nick Mason and Alan Parsons was incredible, because we recreated the drum sound. See, I'm into the engineering, that side of things too. So it was like a masterclass for me watching, you know, Alan work and asking him questions like, oh, so you use that mic and use the, you know, and it's like, okay, that's how you get that sound. And it's a very distinct, cool sound. And then the fact that people can like learn from it or use it in their music, I just feel like it's kind of like has a purpose besides, you know, just the novelty of it.
Yeah. What now we're talking about Pink Floyd. What's your opinion about, you know, Roger Waters, David Gilmour, the tweet that his wife sent out, and the controversy? What I mean, there's people in the 70s, they are rich, they're millionaires, they're behaving like babies about, I don't know, they want to sue one another. It's not about the money, the ego. I don't understand. Well, I'm not famous. I don't have the money. I'm not a musician, so it's hard for me to, at that age, be fooled about stuff like that. What's your opinion?
I mean, it's immature and embarrassing, to be honest. I think, you know, one of the things that, I mean, as far as, let's say, on the Gilmour side and Polly tweet and stuff, I think she was, I mean, I don't think she should have done that, but I think she was just fed up and pissed off and annoyed, you know, and just kind of was like, you know, just lost it. But what, you know, I don't think she's wrong though. And I love Roger Waters in terms of, you know, as an influence, and respect him as, you know, for what he's done. I don't like his politics. I don't like that he forces it on people. I think that's just, you know, and it's also very specific. One thing I don't like about his politics, whether he's anti-Semitic and all that stuff, is kind of like, if he actually is, then I don't like that. I don't like anybody who's, you know, but it's not so much judgment on that, because, you know, it's more just like that it's biased. I like, for instance, he's very like on the politics side, just to say, he picks a side and then says there's the oppressed, and then there's, as if it's black and white. But the reality is that it isn't. You know, it isn't black and white. And one thing that usually is the case, and I don't mind as much, is when musicians are for peace. Usually the musicians are just for peace. You know, like let's say in the Middle East, I have nothing against Palestinians and Israelis, and you know, I have a Jewish heritage myself, but I'm not religious, so I have no bias per se. I'm just kind of like, well, I'm for peace for the Middle East. I'm between Russia and Ukraine. I love Russia and Ukraine. Some of the most beautiful women in the world live in Russia and the Ukraine. I mean, I'm actually part Russian and German, my heritage as well. So it's just kind of like, I mean, I don't, if I had to pick, I support the Ukraine because they are being attacked and all that stuff, but I don't know all the ins and outs. All I feel as a musician is kind of like, well, can we have peace? Can we have a peaceful resolution without, war and killing and everything? So, when, musicians are for peace in different parts of the world, things like that, I'm like, okay, you're putting that in with the music. It's a positive message, but he has a very specific agenda, and he's got a lot of dangerous statements and things that he does that I think are kind of like, even if it's misunderstood, that's dangerous. Sort of like, like a pig with a Jewish star on it, things like that. It's like, dude, this is,
hopefully, it's crazy. I don't like the fact that, of course, I have seen a lot of Roy Waterman, and you're forced into seeing the politics, reading the politics, doing.
Well,
I want to listen to music. I'm not. Yeah, I don't like politics in general. Why don't you keep the stuff to your head, to yourself? So,
he said apparently someone showed me a little sign that he had on his last tour, which I didn't go to. I finally got fed up with it myself, and he was a hero of mine, that said, if you're one of those people who love Pink Floyd but don't like my politics, you can fuck off to the bar or something like that.
That's right. This is exactly that. I was there. You say, if you don't like my politics, get the fuck out of here, go to the bar and get drinks.
Yeah, and it's like, well, I think that's very disingenuous, because you're using the Pink Floyd music, not even as you're actually playing Pink Floyd music, even if you wrote a lot of it, but to get them in the door and then forcing them, saying, you have to like my politics or you can fuck off. I mean, if people really knew, he should just bill it as a political rally with some music and then see how many people actually go. So I think that pisses me off, actually, to be honest with you. When I think about it, it's just kind of like, that's just a bunch of hypocritical bullshit. But anyway, the other stuff, the statement he made also pisses me off, or it just offends me. It offends every Pink Floyd fan, I think, that he wrote Dark Side of the Moon and that the other guys have no ideas and stuff like that. That's just so far off to the extreme. And because he wrote, let's say, all the lyrics and he had the concept. And first of all, it's brilliant. Some of the best lyrics, but not everybody even understands the concept from what he's thinking the concept is. When he explains it, you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. You're on the dark side of the moon there, buddy. But it's brilliant poetry, which he doesn't write anymore. Doesn't write like that anymore. Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon are some of the best rock poetic lyrics. But he doesn't work like that. He doesn't make poetic lyrics as beautiful as they are. And some lines in there are some of my favorite lines ever. But I respect that. But I think, it's especially an album like Dark Side of the Moon. The irony is that it's one of the most balanced Pink Floyd albums where you actually really get to hear the contributions of the other guys.
Absolutely, right.
Because later on, Animals, not so much. The Wall, not so much. The Final Cut, definitely that. If he said, I wrote the Final Cut, you'd believe it, because you'd be like, that sounds like a Roger Waters solo album. But Dark Side of the Moon has an actual documentary where they're talking about Richard Wright saying he wrote the jazz chords that he came up with, and that they had Us and Them from Zabriskie Point, and then Great Gig in the Sky. He didn't write that. There's no lyrics in Great Gig in the Sky. There's no lyrics in Any Color You Like. So he's full of shit on that statement, and it's really obnoxious and so unnecessary, because it's like, look, man, it's screams of insecurity and egomania, because it's like, isn't it enough that you wrote the lyrics and you wrote some of the music and that you share it with these other guys and you have one of the best-selling albums of all time? And as far as him doing a cover of it, he's doing his own version. I have no problem with that. I'm doing a cover. Anybody can do a cover. You can do a cover. I'm doing covers of Sound of Contact. Even if I wrote a whole song, some of the songs I wrote, the whole thing, it's still a cover. because it was Sound of Contact. People noticed Sound of Contact. I'm not going to reclaim it or something. I mean, and so that's what he's, you know, they're trying to make it sound like, you know, Roger Waters re-recording Dark Side, re-recording. He's just doing a tribute, a cover like Steve Hackett did Genesis Revisit. That's what the novel, just replace the old one.
Of course, that's a team effort. It's like, I don't know, Peter Gabriel saying, well, I left Peter Gabriel because the other Steve, Tony, Mike Rutherford, Anthony Phillips, and all that guy were a bunch of idiots. And of course, that's fully, that's the babies. They're guys in the 70s that are egomaniac, and I don't know. I would love to interview one day. I probably will never have the chance to. I'm going to be meeting Gilmore when I go to London in March, because he's a very good friend of Phil Manzanera, and he invite me to his house, so I'm going to be meeting. But Roy probably, I'm a nice person, but if I have the chance to interview him, it's going to be a different interview, because it's going to be a real interview. I'm going to be asking a lot of difficult questions. Probably perhaps I would never be able to interview him, but if I have the chance, it's not going to be a friendly one. I'm going to ask him all the questions that we're talking about what he's done.
Gilmore, if anything, has shown a fair amount of class and, you know, just kind of doing the best he can with that situation. You know, I mean, Roger, no doubt, was brilliant. And there was an imbalance, of course, in his lyric writing ability versus the other guys who are really not lyricists. But just because they're not lyricists doesn't mean their contributions aren't important. You know, besides just even the songwriting, Gilmore just so happens to be one of the best guitar players in rock, and favorites. You know, he's just like been my 5, you know, personally. So, like, and his voice is great. It's much better than Waters. I do like Waters' voice, but, you know, most people prefer Gilmore's, including me. He's also a big influence on me. They both are. But yeah, I think, you know, Gilmore, and also I got to say, the two underrated people are Richard Wright and Nick Mason.
Absolutely.
And, you know, Nick Mason, for the reasons I said earlier, and also happens to be extremely nice guy. If you ever get the chance to meet him, he's just down to earth and funny and just super cool, like Steve Hackett, just a great guy.
Yeah, that was cool, yeah.
But I'm a huge fan. Not only is he a great keyboard player and did some cool stuff, and wrote some nice things on Dark Side, but he sings on it and he sounds good. You know, and so like they stopped doing that. And it's like, man, like I often think, like, the band that had matured into Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here ended after Wish You Were Here and became like a Waters vehicle. Like, it's still great. I love it. But a different animal than it could have been as a band if they respected the fact that it's like, we've got 4 people that have a cool sound together, and with keyboards and, you know, spaced out lyrics and poetic lyrics and the guitar solos. They had like I don't want to say a formula, but like a recipe, you know, like a band sound that has influenced tons of artists afterwards, including myself. But like, they just kind of, you know, couldn't sustain that, which I do understand, because that's the same thing happened with Sound Contact on a much smaller scale. You know, it's not that easy to sustain all those egos in one room, but still, it's ironic that they had one of the coolest bands ever on Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, and then it just kind of like, you know, like that was it, you know. But part of the reason was Richard Wright.
Yeah, like an example I gave you before, right? So, you know, Peter Gabriel sending a tweet, "Hey, your guys of Genesis are an idiot. I wrote all the lyrics to Sell England by the Pound and The Lamb. I went to my room, my space, disappeared for 2 weeks, I wrote it." But yeah, lyrics by itself, you know, Tony was important, Mike Rutherford was important.
I don't think
you know, and so on and so forth. So, you know what I mean? So
yeah, Genesis was different.
Peter Gabriel will never do anything like that. You know why?
Well, yeah, nobody. Well, most people wouldn't do that. You know, you have to really be psychologically unstable and
very unstable.
You know, fortunately, I hate to say it, you know, like, because he, you know, it's funny. It's like a lot of those things turn me off. Yet Pink Floyd, including Roger Waters, I have to acknowledge is, you know, just an important musical foundation for me and for a lot of people. And I almost want to like just sort of separate the work from the people, because the people and the way they behave sometimes, like I was saying earlier, if you meet somebody and they're a jerk, I've had friends who've met him and it was nice, but still this kind of behavior, it's embarrassing. It's really, it's like, I wish he would just like, you know, he's tainting and tarnishing his own legacy, especially right now when it's the 50th anniversary of the best-selling album of all time. And it's like he's insulting his bandmates, pissing off Pink Floyd fans, siding with Putin and all that whole thing. And it's just like, dude, you're just like, you know, it almost seems like he wants people to hate him just so he has the attention, that kind of a thing, which to me is maybe like a bit of like signs of narcissistic personality disorder. Absolutely. Not just narcissism, but an actual personality disorder, a psychosis. But you said you wanted to talk about psychology, so
yeah, the guy is it's crazy. Yeah, I don't. All right, but so Roger Waters. So if we take the politics out of the question, right, and forget about you reading the politics, and the concerts are great. I mean, I as I say, I saw the Roger Waters every time he comes in tour here the United States every 3 years, whatever.
Well, the music is great.
And music is great, you know. So but unfortunately, you pay off. You need to.
He's always been really good. Yeah. They've all been, actually, Pink Floyd in general, even you know, the other with you get a show. I mean, you get lights and lasers and screens and, you know, an audio visual experience like no other. I dream of being able to do that. It does cost a lot of money, but you know, I like the fact that it's one thing I like about him, and I like about Pink Floyd, Gilmore's Pink Floyd and Gilmore, all those guys. They've made a lot of money, but they put a lot back into the show to entertain you. They could make just as much money probably with just playing the music, but they really want to push the envelope. So you have something to talk about. You're like, you know, even back in, which I never saw, but like back in 1980 when they built a wall. I mean, who else built a wall? You know, but you had something to talk about. Say, I went to the show and the first half they built a wall. You know, so very theatrical, very cool. You know, like I said, I have to kind of in my mind almost like pretend to myself that I don't know. Like I don't want to know. You know what I mean? It's like, man, shut up and stop ruining it for everybody. You know, it's kind of selfish and cruel. It's kind of cruel to the fans, really, to be like, dude, we love you. We want to love you, but you're making it hard to love you, man. That's right. You're really being a jerk. So, you know, but anyway, I think it's beyond. I don't even know.
Let's go back to the question. In 2008, you collaborated with Phil Collins' son, Simon, in the album called You Catastrophe. Feel free to elaborate how you end up meeting him and so forth.
I met Simon at Genesis rehearsals. So I was working with Genesis, helping them with software and sounds and stuff, because that's what I do for a living. And they invited me to their rehearsals in New York before the 2007 tour. And when I was there, Phil's son Simon was there, and we hit it off immediately, and started talking about music and working together. The first thing we actually did was Keep It Dark, a cover of the song Keep It Dark, because we were talking, like he said, I always wanted to do a Genesis cover. I haven't done it yet. and you'd be the right person to do it with, because you could tell that I was just, I get it. The Tony Banks, like I'm just, would be the right person. So we did that together, and then that helped him get a record deal for his third solo album, Eucatastrophe. And I co-wrote a song with him, kind of co-produced it too, but called The Big Bang. And it was with his dad. So it was one of the last things his dad did, certainly the last progressive thing his dad played drums on, with Simon and Phil on drums, and then me on keyboards. And then a few other things, some keyboards on his other songs. But then after that was done, he had a solo band with Kelly Nordstrom and Matt Dorsey in it. And we had talked about doing a band. In fact, before he even did that solo album, we said we should do a band, whatever, after we did Keep It Dark. And then that never happened. And then he said to me after he did that, he said, "You still want to do a band?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "I got Kelly and I got Matt." And, they went to my studio. And that's where Sound of Contact was born. We all sat there, the four of us, and came up with the name. The two of them, Simon and Kelly, who now have a band called E-Molecule, they've been working together for even before then. And they had this idea of doing an album about a Dimensionaut, because Kelly had read about some book with a Dimensionaut in it. And the two of them were like, sci-fi nuts who would like write down all these science words and things and stuff. And so they were like, we want to do an album about a Dimensionaut. And so I was like, well, what's the story? And there really wasn't one, that was beyond. There was like some poetry and some things, but I didn't understand any of it. So it's just kind of like, all right, well, if we're going to do it, let's make a story. So I helped flesh out the story and brought in some of my songs that I've had, some of them for a while, and then some of them were fresher. And we co-wrote Dimensionaut, the album, with Sound of Contact. And it was very well received. It kind of had like it was a good blend, I think, for Genesis fans or Phil Collins fans, because Simon himself on his solo records tended to be wanted to get a little away from Genesis and his dad, and not only just on purpose, but I think the style that he's into, his taste, he's into electronica and other styles. He likes the Phil Collins era of Genesis because he grew up with it. He doesn't really know the Peter Gabriel era, by the way, because he didn't grow up with it, and he wasn't that interested in that. But he was, how can you miss when your dad is Phil Collins? You're going to hear all that stuff, and you grew up playing drums too. And he's a great drummer, to Seconds Out and stuff. The real, and then Kelly's into heavy metal. So that's why their band E-Molecule is very edgy and very metal. Matt's kind of into mostly like Peter Gabriel and Sting and the pop side. And then I'm a keyboard player, and I'm into the keyboard playing prog. But the combination of the four of us was good, because it was like, it was maybe a little keyboard heavy like Genesis is, but that fit nice with his drumming, because he was such a great drummer. And he never really, because he is into electronica, so even though he's a great drummer, he would use electronic drums and program drums and perfect drums and stuff like that, which Phil also did. But when Phil played real drums, it's like he's one of the best drummers in the world. So Simon also, amazing drummer. And we played a lot of it live on the floor together. It was great. It was just a great experience. And the combination of the four of us really kind of pushed and pulled in the right directions to get, sometimes a little bit metal, sometimes a little bit electronic, but mostly this lush keyboard thing. And sometimes a little bit of the Police and Tears for Fears thing in there, and Sigur Rós and Porcupine Tree. It was that kind of just like and Coldplay. It was like that combination of pop and prog that helps it not sound too dated, too 70s throwback, but gives you keyboard solos and like moments of nostalgia, let's say. But we only did that one album. That's why I was saying it's like, I could imagine, a lot of people probably could imagine how great it would be if there was 5 albums, like with that chemistry. But we just couldn't keep it together for a variety of reasons. I would have liked to, but it's not up to me. So, you know, it stopped, and that's when I finally started my solo career, because I had no control over it. And it was like, I was excited, you know, from the success of Dimensionaut, that I was like, I wanted to do a follow-up. I didn't want to wait, you know, years and years and years to get it together. I was just like, no, I'm doing an album, I'm doing a follow-up, you know. So that's when I did New World in 2014, a year after Dimensionaut.